Galeb Duhr is an interesting monster in D&D's history. It has been present for all editions of the game, but has changed, sometimes dramatically, each iteration. It serves as a good example of the quirkiness of early D&D, and how later D&D, I feel, has lost some level of that magic. With its first iterations being completely strange and having no real defined purpose, to its later iteration, in 3rd and 5th edition, having a less unique monster with a more defined role that is easier to utilize, but that is also far less compelling. 1st edition D&D often describes monsters very briefly, mostly giving combat stats and leaving the exact nature of the monsters to the DM's imagination. The Galeb Duhr accordingly has a very short description, just a few lines and its stats. It is in the Monster Manual 2 and is described as a curious boulder-like creature with appendages that act as hands and feet. The Galeb Duhr stands 8 to 12 feet tall, are slow, with only a 6-foot move, have neutral alignment, and are very intelligent. All iterations of the Galeb Duhr make their homes in rocky or mountainous areas, but in the first 2 editions they do this because in those locations they can feel the earth power. Interestingly, the earth power is never expanded upon, and leaves good room for interpretation. The Galeb Duhr can cast powerful spells as a 20th level spellcaster, once per turn with no limit. This includes Move Earth, Transmute Rock to Mud, Pass Wall, Wall of Stone, and Stone Shape. This gives them the ability to essentially mold their rocky homes in drastic ways instantaneously, with no stopping to rest. These monsters also have the ability to animate boulders to fight for them. They are weak to cold-based attacks, immune to lightning and normal fire, but are injured by magical fire, and were encountered in groups of 1 to 4. This iteration of the Galeb Duhr is at its most ambiguous, given how little we know about it. I cannot stress how strong these guys' abilities are, though. Sure, they're slow, they're weak to frost, but that's about it. And a monster basically playing Minecraft creative mode in Dungeons & Dragons is fucking ridiculous. Especially in group sizes of 3 or 4. Like, imagine your group encounters some 3 Galeb Duhrs on a cliffside, and they foolishly provoke them like the murder hobos that they are, right? Well, the Galeb Duhrs, in 1 turn, could turn the ground beneath them to mud and push them off the mountainside, with extra moves to spare, or they can make a large tunnel in the cliffside, turn the stone beneath them to mud, push themselves into the tunnel, then immediately create a wall at the tunnel entrance, sealing them off. That's just in 1 round. Like, that's pretty insane. With some prep time, though, they could do anything, right? And you could see the mountains inhabited by the Galeb Duhr to have these absurd and intricate weaving systems of bridges, caves, buildings perhaps, traps, and really any structures built out of stone, because their control of magical abilities, right? It gives them the ability to really do whatever they want with stone. So they can really do whatever. Happening upon one of the places where the Galeb Duhr dwell could totally be like stepping into a strange alien world with all these stone pillars and oddities everywhere, right? Because the Galeb Duhr are intelligent, so they could perhaps even make art with their abilities to whatever purpose they have, you know. In terms of storytelling, there are so many opportunities. First off, the earth power could be anything, right? It could be seismic activity they can detect, because they're near mountains, of course. It could be a magic source, magical ley lines, connections to the elemental plane of Earth. They could be purely elemental beings. It could be a spiritual or a mystical force, the presence of a god or a strong being, and it could really be anything else. I will note that though all of the Galeb Duhr's abilities affect stone, they're not specified as elementals, or they're not specified to have to stay near stone, making them more interesting, because they could be potentially strange organic creatures, remnants of some ancient magic, some forgotten ancient constructs, or yeah, they could just be elementals. But you know, they're intelligent and they have cool abilities. So in second edition, they have the same description and abilities, but their society and ecology were expanded upon. Here they live in small family groups and are described as being unsociable towards other beings, quickly tunneling under the ground when they feel the vibrations of other beings. The Galeb Duhr are once again mysterious here, leaving their origin ambiguous, stating that, though thought to be from the elemental plane of Earth, they do exist in family groups, and young Galeb Duhr have been observed, smaller ones. The Galeb Duhr eat rocks, preferring granite, and disdaining sedimentary rock, which I think is really funny. It's a little quirky, right? A little flavor. Each meal they eat becomes part of them, so anytime they eat stone, that just adds on to their body, so they could be a hodgepodge of different stone materials, which is cool. Or, if some lived just where, like, shale is accessible, right? They would be jagged and they would be brittle. I think that's a pretty good opportunity to do something interesting. The Galeb Duhr also collect gems from underground and small magical items when they find them. And they can identify many types of gems. They also likely possess knowledge of precious metals or metal ore around them, though they have no interest in precious metals. Though they know that, they'll be unlikely to give up this information, as they dislike outsiders, as previously stated, and they are very territorial. So local mining operations would frustrate them for sure. The Galeb Duhr also feel responsible for boulders and rocks around them, like Ents do for trees, which is a pretty cool thing. And the Galeb Duhr are identified by their music, described as an eldritch harmony of gravelly voices. Some speculate this could cause earthquakes or prevent them, or act as a warning to others of their kind, but nobody really knows, leading into their mystery, for sure. Second edition, I feel, expands on these monsters in a pretty cool way. It lends to them being possibly shy but fierce protectors of nature, protecting the mountains where they dwell. They could be wise and peaceful guides who don't seek out people, but if you find them, maybe they'd help you out because they're neutral. They could be religious hermits, living in isolation to be closer to the earth power, perhaps. Or perhaps they could even be the haunting servants of a slumbering horror, if you're willing to tweak their alignment a little bit, because they sing a scary song. They sing an eldritch harmony, right? That's really scary, and they avoid people and other beings, so that could be some level of secrecy. They live underground. They have no discernible culture above ground, though they do live in family groups. So maybe, they could stalk the mountains in search of prey to drag down, to sacrifice to some sort of being that rewards them with this power. Certainly that is, pushing the boundaries of what they're explained to be, but that's what's cool about monsters that aren't heavily described, right? It would go against their neutral nature, but D&D is about storytelling. So if that's the story you want to tell, that's how you get inspiration for it, right? There is also an article in Dragon Magazine number 172 titled "The Ecology of the Galeb Duhr." The article fully describes the second edition Galeb Duhr's life cycle and kind of what they're about. It's a good source for inspiration, but I don't always use supplemental information because, like I was saying before, if there's a story I want to tell using a creature, I like to stick to what the general lore says about them, but I don't want to be held to constraints by like this extra information about them. It kind of goes on and explains them in detail, which kind of takes away their mystery, right? Which is what I like about them. And of course, it's D&D. you can do whatever you want. So, but if that is interesting, I do recommend giving it a read. It's kind of lengthy actually, but it's Dragon Magazine 172. You can find it online. Pretty cool. Now, in the transition to 3rd edition, they really changed a lot. I feel like they kind of lose what was going for them in the first 2 editions. They're changed to be earth elementals that are bound to the material plane and have a humanoid form, right? They do have cool characteristics, right? Of being solitary type of extremely old ancient beings that stay still for ages. Curled up, they look like a boulder. That's pretty cool. You know, so you could be walking up a mountain and walk past one and you'd never know. And they could sit there for a long time and kind of watch from their mountainside. Kind of things change, maybe like settlements being built and then falling to ruin, that kind of thing, which is pretty cool. But that kind of goes into the realm of giants for me, which are kind of just cooler. You know, this version of the Galeb Duhr, it feels like it treads that ground again. It's a little different. They're on average 4 feet tall. Some of the bigger ones are like 12 feet tall, which is cool. But again, they kind of just... they're nothing like how they were in 1st and 2nd edition, and they kind of just remind me of that whole, like, slumbering giant type of archetype, except, of course, they're viewing things, but that could be, like, storm giants in the sky, kind of watching what's going on. They do retain their rock magic in this edition, which is pretty cool, because that's a cool part about them. But again, I think it's not really what the Galeb Duhr was first about. It's kind of an interesting take on an elemental, but you know, it's really different. Now, in 4th edition, the Galeb Duhr they're very different. 4th edition's kind of just weird anyway, but here the Galeb Duhr are elementals, or maybe dwarves. They speak Dwarven, and they were with the dwarves when they tried to escape their hill giant masters, and they're described as dwarves, but that could be some sort of typo, because there's literally like a paragraph in there about them, and it's kind of, I don't know, their type is elemental, but it says like when the dwarves escaped, including the Galeb Duhr. So I don't really know what that means. It's a little ambiguous there, which is interesting, right? They could be like some mystical dwarves that are so like in tune with the mountain that they become like these elemental beings. That is pretty cool. It's pretty fucking dope, honestly. Or they could be like the souls of the dead dwarves, like right when they're buried in stone in the mountain, they like physically become part of it, which is also pretty cool. But again, they're not really like what the Galeb Duhr originally was. And this is also in 4th edition, and they kind of move on from here when they go to 5th edition. So it's like a weird blip in their history. It's just like a completely different creature. Like the 3rd edition one was different, but it was still kind of like a rock monster, right, in the hills that like lives there and has rock magic. This is so different. Also, they don't have rock magic, kind of. Some of them just throw rocks, which when they hit somewhere, they turn into rough terrain, which is pretty cool. Yeah, they can kind of only like make rocks out of nothing, which is weird. I feel like that's in there for gameplay more than actual like lore. And then the other variation, they have like an ability where they like move before they attack, which is kind of similar to what the 5th edition one does. And then that version, the one that rolls, can also just choose somewhere to create rough terrain, which is kind of interesting, but like, why not have just also the same attack as the first one? They do have a cool ability though, where they like select an area and then a target in that area, and then the ground like grabs onto them and like pulls them in and grapples them. That's pretty cool. This is the only version of the Galeb Duhr that has that ability. It's pretty cool, right? So I like this creature. I like its kind of idea where you can go with it, but it's not really the Galeb Duhr. I feel like maybe in some sort of way we missed out on the original Galeb Duhr here, and we just have like another creature, like just call these guys like the Rocklings or something, and then it's just not even the same at all. So they could both exist, which is pretty cool. Then you have the 5th edition version of the Galeb Duhr, which honestly to me is kind of the lamest version. It's the same as the 3rd edition one in terms of like general idea, but it has like the rolling ability I was talking about with the 4th edition, but that's more of its focus. Like if it rolls down a hill, it like rolls fast. Like the other one kind of could roll a little bit, this one can go fast. And to note, by the way, which I just noticed I hadn't talked about, the first one from 1st edition, they could animate boulders to be like to fight for them, right? Which is super cool. The 2nd edition one can do that. Yeah, so the first 2 editions of the Galeb Duhr have that animate ability where they can animate boulders. The 3rd edition one kind of does. It has like animate object, but only on stones, which is similar, but I feel like you lose some of the flavor there. If maybe I'm being too harsh, I don't know. But it does. It can kind of do the same thing. The 5th edition one is pretty cool with that ability where it can animate boulders, but they become copies of it, but they don't have the ability to make more copies, and they don't have a high intelligence score or high charisma score. The 4th edition one legit just completely loses that trait, which I think is kind of a defining trait of the Galeb Duhr, even though I missed talking about it, except for the first one. Yeah, it's weird that the 4th edition one doesn't have that. It really seems like it's not even trying somewhat to be the same. But in 5th edition, the Galeb Duhr, right, it has the powerful hill rolling ability. It's more tanky with its like overall defenses. It's kind of resistant to non-magical attacks in general. It has the animate ability. When it stays still, it's indistinguishable from stone, which they kind of all have except 4th edition. But that's it. Like, its lore is just 3rd edition. They kind of chill, except they're summonable now, which is cool. Like, people summon them as guardians, but that's kind of just golems, right? Or just earth elementals. Like, unless you have a very specific reason to need the rolling ability, just summon earth elementals, right? It's kind of the same. And that kind of like makes them a little lame to me. They lose their magic. That's like their huge crazy thing, right? And they don't even mention the earth power at all in 3rd, 4th, or 5th edition. Like, why? That is like a really cool trait for there. That's like they kind of lose everything cool about them when they move into kind of this new humanoid form, chilling on a hill type figure, right? Which is, it's just a hermit. Like, you're kind of in that sleeping giant territory. You're kind of in that like wise hermit territory, which I'll admit, finding a Galeb Duhr on a hillside and like people talk about him, and you like go up and you're like, hey, I know you're actually like alive, right? You're not just a boulder. That's a little cooler than just a forest hermit. It kind of serves the same narrative purpose. But you could kind of they could be a dragon, right? Morphed as a human. There's other interesting ways you can go. Not that this is a bad one, but like it's not super unique in actual function, right? In form, it's pretty unique, but like if a wizard's gonna use an elemental guardian and you don't want to just use a basic one, just use a water weird, right? Have like a moat or like a river or something. I feel like water weirds have a lot more. They have a lot more room for narrative stuff, right? Because like the Galeb Duhr doesn't even have the ability to pass through earth or stone. It's more material than that. Like, what's the point? I think there's a reason I've never seen one in use, right? And then even looking back, where they're found in D&D throughout all of its history, not just the 3rd and 5th edition, but in general, you only really see them a couple times, like underground, which is pretty cool, I guess. But there's not like a focus on them, right? Not that there needs to be, but I think there's a lot of cool opportunity, and that's what's really cool about D&D, right? Is I can look back, or we could look back, right, and say, oh, the 1st and 2nd edition Galeb Duhr is super cool. There's like vagueness, there's ability, right? They don't just have to be like rocks sitting on a mountainside. They could have this weird alien environment that they heavily modify with their magic. They could be insidious. They could be like religious hermits or whatever. They don't have to be elementals. They could be. But then again, we already have elementals, right? So I don't know. It's just really interesting to think about. And it's in D&D, right? It's just a framework to tell collaborative stories. So you don't really lose anything by having the 4th edition and the 5th edition and the 3rd edition Galeb Duhrs. They're just different creatures. But yeah, so you can just go back and say, hey, I like the 2nd edition Galeb Duhr, and I like the 4th edition Galeb Duhr, and I want a story based around these creatures. They could both exist. You would just have the original one be the Galeb Duhr, and the 4th edition one be like some sort of minions or something. And they could be elementals, right? They could have this connection to like an elemental story where you go through the planes or whatever. Or they could be more terrestrial, and they're certainly terrifying, right? I'm sure if you ported them into 5th edition, they'd have to be like a crazy challenge rating, just because of what they're able to do with the environment. But I don't know, I just think it's a really cool creature, and, you know, a really cool monster concept. I don't know, I just wanted to share a cool creature from D&D. Yeah, so that's what I had to say about the Galeb Duhr. Pretty fucking dope. Kind of a shame the way it turned out, but like I was just saying, you know, whatever. I'm interested in doing more kind of talks about cool creatures from D&D, like the older ones that kind of got left behind. Or maybe talking about some creatures that aren't from Dungeons & Dragons, and kind of talking about how I would use them in a narrative setting, right? Like mythology, or, you know, cryptids and shit, and being like, oh, like, how would I do a story around, like, the Wendigo or something, right? I think that's kind of interesting. This is kind of my first video in this series. I don't really read a script well. I kind of started the video reading a script. It's weird. I don't read well like that, so I kind of just started rambling. Let me know if that's kind of annoying. But I don't know. I'm just really into this shit. I like talking about it, so yeah. Hope you liked learning about a fucking rock creature.